In this video, I want to go over some of the new and very recent reveals and additions with Fallout 76. Earlier this week, the game received a patch that was relatively on the small side, but it had a couple of changes that are far-reaching, and by far-reaching, actually pissing off a subset of the community. So we'll go over what exactly happened with those, the death of magic weapons as it's being dubbed. Even further, there's a couple of in-game events that were just revealed, but also are going on right now, starting today. The new Treasure Hunter event is live, so we'll go over that and its rewards. But even outside of that, we did get some new details on this upcoming Bombs Drop event, as well as how Steel Dawn quests will be going up on the public test server. There's a lot to go through and get through in this video. If you enjoy the content, you can leave a like or get subscribed. But otherwise, without further ado, let's first take a look at this most recent hotfix for Fallout 76 coming out earlier this week. So although there was a myriad of more minor changes, some bug fixing here or there, the big change to come with this hotfix was the death of magic weapons. If you're not familiar, magic weapons were more or less broken legendary weapons in Fallout 76. There are many videos posted online of these, and you may have actually seen them in game at points where somebody just does insane amounts of damage to enemies. Notably, you'll see this against certain boss tier enemies like Scorchbee's Queens. They were dubbed magic weapons, but in reality, it was just a typical weapon having certain types of legendary effects. Some of the things infected seem to be junkies instigating, but then also things like the limb damage, hit chance, and bashing legendary effects. So the combination of some of those effects would have insane damage dealt. And it's important to note, these are separate from hacked-in weapons. Those also being a problem in Fallout 76, also dealing ridiculous amounts of damage, but not affected by this update and separate from magic weapons. Technically, magic weapons are a mess up by Bethesda, not anything malicious by the user. And really, the background speaks for itself. As you can see, these could be devastating. Certain combinations doing ridiculous amounts of damage, and in other instances, just dealing additional damage. As we'll touch on in a moment, I'm sure several people didn't even realize they were taking advantage of these magic weapons. It seems like what caused this all was actually a fix by Bethesda a little over a year ago, the Furious legendary effect, which makes it so you should deal increased damage the more hits you have on an enemy, wasn't working appropriately. They fixed that in a update, but it seems like unintentionally when this was changed, it also created magic weapons. So though Furious technically works as it should, especially following that update, it seemed like some aspects of it were also being applied when you were using some of these other, just before mentioned, legendary effects. And some of the weird interactions there led to massive amounts of damage. So then, this being fixed or removed with the most recent update means that now it'll deal whatever amount of damage it was supposed to otherwise, not massive amounts. So that's the first change. Two of the other ones of note, also the Instigating legendary effect and the Nerd Rage perk card will apply additive, not multiplicative damage. This is a big change we saw across the board with Fallout 76. Once one wasteland went out, instead of damage values multiplying with each other, they now add with each other to calculate their bonuses. Both Instigating and Nerd Rage, they figuratively speaking slipped through the cracks, and we're still using the old method. So what this means is if you're using Nerd Rage, Instigating, or any of those magic weapons, you saw a giant reduction in damage. And in general, over the past couple of months, Fallout 76 has gotten significantly more difficult, mainly because of this big balance change I just talked about, with the transition to additive damage. And there's a couple of ways to look at this. On one hand, even though many people are calling these nerfs, and you can look at them as nerfs, technically all this is are bug fixes. The damage these weapons or these perks were providing were unintended, and it was kind of known, especially if you were data mining the game, that this was unintended. With Instigating and Nerd Rage, not quite as obvious. With the magic weapons, it was pretty widely known, especially on the ones doing stupid amounts of damage, but also at points there were people using a legendary weapon that was benefiting from the quote-unquote magic weapon buff, but they probably didn't even realize it because they weren't dealing ridiculous amounts of damage. And from that perspective, this definitely can be pretty frustrating. You just got less damage now, after several waves of getting less damage, and with one wasteland, getting significantly tougher enemies almost across the board, depending on your level. There's been quite a bit of argument back and forth around this in the community, but at least from my perspective, I think it is easy to understand the frustration. With magic weapons in particular, when you have a feature like this, that I would call a feature considering it was in the game for over a year now, assuming the speculation and data mines are correct that this was changed with the Furious change and fix, that was back in August of 2019. So Bethesda allowed these weapons to be a huge problem for over a year. Naturally, people are going to use them. They're going to be integrated into their builds and actually build entire characters around these high damage dealing items. Then for just one day in a random update for that all to change quite drastically, that can be very frustrating. You go from dealing tons of damage to now next to nothing and have to change your build once once again to one of the more meta ones. So there definitely are two sides to this coin. On one hand, it is without a doubt a bug fix. These were things that were broken and are now fixed. The long-term health of the game hypothetically would be better. But on the other hand, after taking a year to fix it, it can be pretty frustrating for people who just got used to this. Even further, I would say one of the other negative sides of this is how many nerfs have just been coming to Fallout 76 as of late. Again, one wasteland just buffing enemies, they're stronger, at points have higher resistances, but now it's just been several updates of nerfs, despite the fact that Bethesda continues to state this change from multiplicative to additive damage does mean they could provide more buffs in the future, but we haven't seen any of those yet. Things are just harder, and although hypothetically what they're saying is true, until they start acting on it, it's already been several months. And even right now on the public test server, nothing like that is live, so it's likely still several months away. And one of the other frustrating things around this is it just wasn't communicated. And considering how many people were using some of these items, it seems like something that would have been good to actually mention in a post somewhere, just like a heads up, or even just a heads up on all future balance changes would be kind of nice. So either way, that's a bit of context on what's going on with this back and forth on magic weapons and some of the nerfs around the game. If you're an active player, you probably have felt this. If you're a more casual player, perhaps it kind of slid by you, but hopefully in this one I could give some perspective as to why people feel so strongly one way or the other. If you're somebody avoiding these, this probably feels like a pretty good redeeming moment. Some other fixes to come with this update that are pretty interesting. Endurance bonuses offered by armor and under armor now correctly grant +5 health per point of endurance. Previously, endurance bonuses were not actually increasing your overall health, which is a pretty nice buff, although a relatively minor one in the grand scheme of things. Mole miner pails and technical data are no longer tradable. This specifically being empty pails for mole miners. This is a pretty interesting change, and another one that's kind of a band-aid fix. So the big reason empty mole miner pails, those specifically being the ones you can purchase from vendors and also giving you the highest chance at getting the rare rewards, were made untradeable is due to the massive duping that has occurred around these items. These things were purchased and then duped in mass. And although that floods the market with the rare rewards, they also award you caps, which is a big problem in that it just creates a huge overinflation problem. People can have thousands or even millions of caps depending on how many pails were duped. Then you trade them around to alt accounts and your friends, so removing their tradability is a way to cramp down on that. The Mole Miner event or Treasure Hunter event is going live yet again starting today and lasting for this weekend. I'll talk a bit more about it later in this video, but the new pails implemented with this, because they kind of changed up how those work, are also not tradable. The actual cosmetic rewards are, but the pails themselves aren't. And even further, this is a common trend we see with some of the new weapons added in. Of course, a lot of these new items relying on the gold bullion system. And in a way, it's kind of good in that it'll reduce duping going forward. You'll have less god tier weapons duped and spread all over the place, but at the same time, it does kind of suck in that it really reduces player autonomy. You're removing features that were once there for players. Not being able to trade some of the crazy weapons from Wastelanders means that I just rarely use them, because the likelihood of me getting a god tier drop on them is really low. So although in some ways a good change, another way I feel like it's a bit short-sighted from Bethesda. I'm still holding out for a more permanent solution to the duping problem, like proper tools behind the scenes to track and delete duped items. Although for the final section on this hotfix, it seems like there was a few unexpected changes. One of the odd ones is these flags in the game were made dirty. These are flags you could previously win by doing some of the Pioneer Scouts quest, and it made a nice camp object. And despite the fact that previously they were pretty clean and crisp, now they're a bit dirtier. Bethesda has responded to this, so hopefully it does get fixed in the future, but something odd that slipped through. There's a bit of a weird one in that inventory and workbench lag, as well as repair lag, seems to just be way higher. So you'll probably notice when entering into one of these things, it'll just be way laggier. And you really see this when hovering over weapons in the weapons workbench. I am not exaggerating, getting about 5 FPS, as you can see. I have no idea how Bethesda managed to let this one slip through the cracks, especially when you have something like a public test server that's supposed to catch bugs like this. Obviously, whatever change instituted this was not ever live on the public test server. In fact, several of the changes with this patch never were featured on the public test server, which is pretty confusing. But I feel like a bug like this coming in at a game at this point in its life cycle is kind of embarrassing from Bethesda. So one thing if they hotfix it real quick, but this update went live on Tuesday, we're now approaching end of day on Thursday, and there's no word of any fix on the horizon. And lastly, an even more bizarre one, a variety of overlay programs, specifically being those programs that you can record the game with, cause it to crash. So I personally run the game in a windowed mode and use GeForce Experience, and if you're recording your screen, as in not the game directly, but the overall window, or use GeForce Experience, things seem to work okay. So for me, it actually doesn't really impact me. But if you go on OBS and select the game as a direct capture option, like many people do with most games, Fallout 76 just immediately immediately crashes. It's another one Bethesda has responded to, but for some content creators out there, a pretty frustrating change in that you literally can't record the game unless you transition how you record overall. Fortunately, it's not all bad news, as we also have some new things getting added to the game right now and on the horizon. So we'll end this video out on a much more positive note. If you're feeling festive, Bethesda has posted up a bunch of the Halloween-themed ATX items, and although at first glance you might be like, okay, this is actually a learning moment from them. Last year, they posted the Halloween ATX items right at the end of the month, so you had like a few days to decorate your camp with them, which was way too short to get into the Halloween spirit. But this year, they've definitely learned from that, re-releasing the old stuff last week, posting some new things this week, and there's even some more on the horizon to look forward to. Although as far as this rumored Halloween event, it doesn't really seem like anything's coming. I feel like we would have known by now, so likely just some other events not Halloween related. Which, speaking of, today does mark the start of the new Treasure Hunter event, and there's some important disclaimers around this. There are a few changes with this. Now treasure hunters spawn across the map overall, no longer just in the Ash Heap region, and basically to find these, just go to any above ground location that's not an event where enemies are spawning. Fast travel around enough times and you will find a treasure hunter wandering about, and you can kill him and get one of 3 pail types. And yet again, you can buy empty pails for vendors, being those same 3 types. The ones you buy from vendors then craft into regular pails do have a better drop chance though. I'll have a full link to the drop chance spreadsheet down below if you want to check it out for yourself, but a very important disclaimer. These are new pails. So technically in game, they are labeled exactly the same as last year, except there's some differences. One, these new pails drop all of these cool new rewards, which I'll have scrolling in the background. The old pails still drop the same rewards as they did when they released. So if you have a bunch of old pails saved, you're not going to get anything new from them. But even further, people will definitely try and scam newer players or just uninformed players in that you can only trade the old pails. These newer pails are untradeable. So if you see someone selling a bunch of pails, those are old versions. You cannot get the new rewards from them. But if you do for some reason have an empty, uncrafted mole miner pail, this will now craft into the new pail even if you bought it previously. There's actually a way for people to get some of the new items using this. If they had a ton of saved empty mole miner pails, following patch 22, they would craft into the new pail. So some of these items, the new items, have actually popped up. So yeah, that's kind of your buyer's guide or guide for using this event and not getting scammed while doing it. Outside of that, we do know the bombs drop event is coming late next week. They're celebrating the anniversary of when the bombs dropped in the Fallout universe. During this, it's going to feature double experience, double daily score. So if you complete daily challenges, you'll get twice the score reward, as well as a 25% discount on legendary purveyor purchases. And this too actually has led to some frustration. I know I said the rest of the video was positive, but some people were a bit unhappy that the bombs drop event was listed as an event, and many people, including myself, thought it'd be some kind of new in-game event like treasure hunters. Well, in reality, it's just a couple of bonuses, some value changes behind the scenes, but not really much new to do, just additional ways or more incentive to do the existing content. But even further, this is a compounding effect, I feel like, in the sense that a lot of people were looking forward to some Halloween event. They said they weren't doing Mischief Night, but there might be something else in the works. Thus far, we've heard nothing about something else, so it's almost confirmed there isn't something else in the works. Perhaps Bombs Drop is that event, which again isn't really much of an event, it's something minor. And then finally, Bethesda also announced that starting later today, certain Steel Dawn quests, that being the Brotherhood of Steel DLC, will be going live on the public test server. And there's no NDA for this, so be wary of spoilers online, as certainly some will be posted. I'm going to try and get a video out on just my first impressions playing some of these new quests and what I think of them, but do note it is a work in progress. This is still on the public test server, and some feedback will likely be implemented before launch, which is still over a month away now. Either way though, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this one. Hopefully you guys found this video informative, but until next time, I hope to see you all later.